I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name's Tarek. I want to thank John for asking me. I want to thank the group for having me out. As I was listening to you share your experience, I've been active in sponsorship since I was 5 months sober. And one thing that I'm convinced of is unfinished amends is one of the reasons people relapse. We always talk about the surrender in the first step, but the ultimate surrender is in the 9th step. And I've sponsored enough individuals over this time period that I see the connection to that statement, that it holds true. Because I watch people, they'll go out, they'll make amends to the immediate family. I know they're emotional, but let's face the truth, the majority of the time your family member is not going to spit in your face and throw you out. But when it's someone you haven't seen in 10 years, that you stole $200 from, or you slept with their spouse, or you stole from them, it's a different story. You know, they talk about the word alcohol is only mentioned in the first step. That's only in the short form of the steps. Our big book's the long form of the steps. The word alcohol is stretched out through the book. Remember, at the beginning, we agreed to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. And so the experience you're having right now, complete those 9-step amends. Those 9-step promises that everybody wants to work and wait for the steps to come true, they happen halfway through the amends process. For some of us, they happen maybe 10, 15 amends into the process. But I watch it all the time. It's a true statement, unfortunately. A power greater than myself separated me from alcohol in the morning of November 5th, 2007. And thanks to a God that I do not understand, nor do I comprehend, a group of wonderful mentors that I've had over these years, and a loving fellowship around me that cares more about whether I live or die, and instead of hurting my feelings, I've been continuously sober for that time period. And I'm always grateful that the mentality that I had out in the bars and the streets has followed me into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wanted the best of everything out there, and I want the best of everything in here. But I've watched people settle all the time. So I'm going to tell a little story. If you took everyone in Alcoholics Anonymous out of AA and you put them back in the bar, you're gonna witness some really interesting things. A third of those people, they're gonna walk into the bar. They're gonna belly up to the bar. They're gonna drink just until they feel good, and they're gonna go home. You have this other third that's gonna come to the bar. They're gonna belly up to the bar, and they're gonna wallow in their beer, and they're gonna cry in their whiskey, and they're gonna tell you this is all there is of alcohol. And then you got this other third. Let's call them the mad dogs. So they're going to burn that bar to the ground. And then they're going to go burn another bar to the ground. And then they're going to find an after party and they're going to burn that to the ground. Now, if you took those individuals out of the bar and you put them back in Alcoholics Anonymous, that's how they work the steps. And there's nothing wrong with it. This is not set from a place of judgment. They're all necessary because I'm a second step proposition guy that says God is everything. So that's got to be part of God. But a third of them come to our meetings because they need a meeting. Because they need to feel better. And they go home. Then we have another third that wallows in their big books and cries in our meetings and tells you this is all there is the 12 steps in God. And then you have this other third, spearheads for God's ever-advancing creation. They believe, I believe, our meetings should be pep rallies for the power of God running through our lives. But for some reason, we think the power of God or talking about God is going to scare away a newcomer. It's okay. Alcohol will bring him right back. So my big book's very clear what my responsibility is tonight. I need to describe to you in a general way, from my own point of view, in my own language, how I establish my relationship with God. Now, I'm not going to give you the end result of what my specific conception of God is. What really matters here is the directions and the path that we take to get there. There's this wonderful story about 12-step religious and spiritual doctrines are like donkeys. Everybody has a donkey. I ride a 12-step donkey. I ride another spiritual tradition donkey. You have Buddhist donkeys, Islamic donkeys, Christian donkeys, Jewish donkeys. Meeting makers make it donkeys. Why poke fun at someone else's donkey when you're riding a donkey? So we're all going to climb the mountain on our donkeys. But when we get to the vista to stare off, we're all going to dismount our donkeys and we're going to look at and experience the vista from our experience. There are as many perspectives about God on this planet as there are people on the planet. It's a personal experience. So I don't want to get lost. I used to come up to the podium and I want to talk about mechanics of step work, and there's only one way to do it, and you have to do it just like the big book says or you're going to fail. I don't believe that anymore. People are not drinking because they're not writing a specific kind of inventory. People are drinking because they're not writing inventory. And so we can keep this very simple and basic, and the big book and the instructions in our big book are the guideline that we use. But I got a friend who says the big book is limitless, and those pages are 500 feet deep. And that has held true in my experience. The questions you can ask yourself out of that big book can be fascinating if you have curiosity and you're willing to investigate and you don't take things as the gospel just because your sponsor said it. The two most important questions to ask a sponsor: what do you mean by that? And just how do you do that? Because sponsors love to give you some blanketed statement. Oh, go do that. And like we know how to do it. That hasn't held true in my experience. You know what I was like? Life was painful. Not physically. Mentally and psychically, life was painful. I'm a guy that needed an anesthetic. And so when alcohol came along, I fell for it. It was the anesthetic that I was looking for. I never had a problem having friends. I suffer from what a lot of alcoholics and other members of other fellowships struggle from: being molested when you're very young, having the abandonment. I'm not scared to talk about it. I've spoken from enough podiums where the identification with that experience has completely left me. It is not relevant today. How's that trouble of my own making? A 5-year-old boy, that happens to him. It wasn't of my own making. But the justification of the behavior for the next 24 years, those are the troubles associated with that event, not the event itself. And that's how we get free of horrific things that happen to us. I was full of judgment. I demanded a lot, but I was willing to give very little. I constantly had stress in my personal relationships. Never battled depression until sobriety. I was hunted by misery. I had this extraordinary fear about becoming a productive member of society. I had a spiritual void. And academics and athletics filled that spiritual void. The addictive process, the alcoholic mind, it's been there all along. Believe it or not, it's still there. I'm addicted to the 12 steps in recovery. That process that dwells within me has not been eradicated. You know, I was looking for certain things out there. Sense of purpose. I was looking for fellowship. I was looking for ease and comfort. And I found them in alcohol and a lot of mind-altering substances. What do we look for in here? You better get the same ease and comfort from these 12 steps in this big book and your relationship with God as you did with the alcohol. The sense of purpose, when you start sponsoring, will stare at you. You look into someone's eyes and you watch that light go on, and you get to witness the regenerative power of God right in front of you. I grow more spiritually when I'm engaged in that process and that energy transfer than I do when I go through the steps myself. And I'm a guy that works the first 9 steps every year. For no specific reason, really. I just find myself going through the steps about once a year. Used to be I had to set this intent. That's changed. 3 of us got together this year. You guys think about going through the steps? Sure, why not? Went through the steps in 1 month. Doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out process like some people make it out to be. Quick, quick, quick. So, around 15, I had my first spiritual experience that I can recall. I think I had them before. Their recollections are these brief slivers of visions. But I remember the first one because I had, when I had this spiritual experience, attitudes, ideas, and emotions which had been guiding me to that point in my life were completely cast aside. And a new set of motives and conceptions began to dominate me. So I was at this pool party. And we were at the friend's house whose parents let you drink when you're in high school, but they take all the car keys from the people who have cars. And I remember sitting on the side of the pool, a couple buddies, a lot of freckles, white as can be, clear. I was clear. It wasn't even white. My name is Tarek. I look like I'm Irish. So when people say they didn't fit in, sometimes maybe I guess that could relate to me, but I don't think it did. But I was terrified. And I noticed that there were a bunch of guys at this pool party that were jumping up. They were going up on the tool shed, which was about 10 feet away from the deep end of the pool. And they were running on the roof of the shed and jumping into the deep end. And I was terrified of heights. 10 feet was high for me. And I don't know when the magic happened. Somewhere between the 2nd and the 5th drink, I had a profound change in feeling and outlook. Somewhere between the 2nd and the 5th drink, an internal upheaval took place. I had a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from my insecurity. And I got up on that shed, and I jumped in that pool. Alcohol did for me what I could not do for myself. Here, let's face the truth. None of us, not a single person, would be sitting in this sanctuary tonight if alcohol and if other substances apply to your story. You can throw those in the mix. If those things had not done a tremendous amount for us, they would have never done so much to us. That's a cold truth to face. That's why we struggle. That's why we must find that ease and comfort in here. That uneasiness, that annoyance with everyone in the world and all of life's circumstances, and that feeling that I will never be satisfied. If you want to know what I was like, that was it. I needed the anesthetic. The wonderful thing about alcohol, 2 wonderful things about alcohol. It changed me. But almost more importantly, it changed all of you. I could finally tolerate the people in my life. That is powerful. That is a psychic change. And so, I was a periodic drinker. Academics were really important to me. Went to college. Took a little bit longer to graduate. But this interesting phenomenon happened in 1995. I discovered this thing called the Grateful Dead and widespread panic. And my life took a turn. And once again, I discovered fellowship, brotherhood. In the midst of excitement, I discovered a deeper meaning to have a relationship with alcohol and these other substances. I'd proved to the world I was going to be important in that scene. And then the weapon that I forged, which was alcohol, going to concerts, and selling drugs, turned into a boomerang and swung and all but cut me to ribbons. I had 3 wonderful jobs, worked for 3 Fortune 500 companies, lost each one of those jobs as a result of my relationship with these substances and alcohol because I needed my anesthetic. On the evening of November 4th, 2007, I was arrested 2 Schedule I felonies in the state of Florida, intent to distribute and trafficking. And this is the what happened portion of my story. So I was in Duval County Jail in Jacksonville, Florida, and I stayed up all night. Use your imagination. I hadn't slept in 5 days. I had no business behind the wheel of a car. No business going to these concerts. That's what I was doing. I was traveling around the country following this band around. And I sat up that first night. And so it's my rebirth date. I'd like to refer to it as a rebirth. Rebirth is a painful process. And everything I went through to get to that rebirth point was painful. I don't know why, but most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they commence to solve their problems. And there is a spectrum for that, and it's got multiple degrees on it. I'm very grateful that this was my experience in the ringer. I stayed up all night that first night. I'm sitting on the edge of the cot in the cell, and this thought was delivered to me. It wasn't made up by Tarek's thinking, cognitive mind. The thought was, today's Jason's birthday, and it's your sobriety date. See, Jason was one of my closest friends that was taken from this earth, stripped from his body, his spirit was, on my birthday in 2003. Now, they didn't find his body till the next morning, but that's the way I like to tell the story. And I knew that there was a power out in this universe that made that happen. It was not a coincidence. So I was beginning to come to believe before I ever worked the step. I think part of the first step, I can sit down and take a guy through the steps. I can have a sponsor take me through the steps. And I can see what alcoholism is. Right? The loss of control once you start. And once you stop, you always start, no matter how great the necessity or the wish not to do so. Now, I don't think the spiritual malady or the bedevilments that are on page 52 in our big book of what happens to us when we're consciously separated from God, I don't believe that's part of alcoholism. It's part of our problem, though. Because if we said that was alcoholism, then the majority of the people walking on this planet would suffer from it. But it is part of our problem. And so part of the surrender, that's the part of the first step we cannot work is surrender. Think about it. I would have done it before the bankruptcy, before I lost my home, before I burned the relationships to the ground, before I was arrested, when I first felt the nip of the ringer. I think that's true for a lot of people sitting in here tonight. I wish we could work a surrender, but I don't think we can. That's a gift. So this surrender experience, I think, requires reduction to nothingness. I used to talk about this thing called Step Zero, but me and my buddy Carl have been talking about this other thing for the past couple of weeks. And what we talk about is, sometimes before you even work the steps, you have to come to believe something. And if you don't hear anything I say tonight, hear this. If you're new, those people under 90 days, come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as you are living it. That, I think, is mandatory before the rest of this stuff works. Some people call that exploring all your alternatives until you're left with 2. Live life on a spiritual basis or die the alcoholic death, which is a slow, arduous, painful process unless you're fortunate and you're punched quick. Your ticket gets punched quick. And you know what an alcoholic death truly is? It's losing our humanity. That's what it is. Losing our humanity. So part of surrender being reduction to nothingness requires getting pummeled. And that comes in varying degrees and in different forms. For me, one of the best things my parents, my family ever did for me was when I had been in that jail, I can't remember how many days, but it was in a huge pod. And they had these 2 staircases all the way up from the 4th tier that went down to the bottom. There's 2 phones on either side. And I called 3 people. I knew one of them was going to pick up the phone. My mom, no. She didn't want to talk to me. My dad did not want to talk to me. And my best friend and my brother, 4, did not want to talk to me. And every time I hung up the phone, being crushed by a self-imposed crisis that I could not postpone or evade became more real with each phone call. Chunks of me were just being stripped away. I had no plans and designs on how I was going to get myself out of this. I had nobody left to manipulate. But that was vital for my surrender. Eventually, this guy that I was in that entrepreneurial activity with, he got me a lawyer. And I had to go to an arraignment. And they shackled me to a group of guys going to court that day at my ankles and at my wrists. And they trucked us into this courtroom. And I met my attorney. And I said, have you spoken to my mom? Because I'm the type of alcoholic that disappears. And mom is calling all the time. And son does not pick up the phone. So I hadn't seen my mom in a minute. What I'm about to describe to you is the breaking point in the surrender and the internal shift that happened for me. And you read it at the beginning of your talk. A vision for you. I couldn't see my life with alcohol and all these other substances. I couldn't see my life with it. I literally reached that jumping off place. And I was no longer a Sally that you could smile at. And that's the beautiful part of it. And so I said, Travis, my attorney, you talk to my mom? He goes, yeah, she's right behind you in the gallery. And what I'm about to describe to you is where I pinpointed something happened. I was opened up to this universe and I became more vulnerable in this little instant than I've ever been in my entire life. And something moved through me. I call it surrender. I was split wide open, completely reduced to nothing. I looked at my mom and I saw this woman that hadn't eaten. Eyes were completely black, frail, pale, and she almost fainted right there in the courtroom, almost collapsed. And in that instant, I became willing to do whatever I had to do to never be capable of doing something like that to someone I care about. We talk about acceptance a lot. I don't. Guys that work with me, we don't talk about acceptance a lot. I talk about unacceptance. Here's the curious thing about unacceptance. When things become unacceptable, you actually become willing to do something. Living that way of life became unacceptable to me. And in that instant, I became willing to do whatever I had to do to not be that individual. Why the surrender happened for me like that, I don't know. I work in this industry. I own a program. I watch guys whose self-imposed crisis looks magnificently worse than mine, but yet they don't have the commitment that I do. Fascinating. Again, proves to me that this is a complete gift. Like my sponsor says, I've gotten this blessing so I can be a blessing. And tonight, I'm not here to talk to everybody. My hope is to touch a few of you, that the Spirit in me is going to touch the Spirit in you, and you're going to question something that's going to change your perspective and catapult you into a new course of action. That's my hope tonight. That's it. That's it. I'm not here to tell you how to do it. I used to be that guy. I'm not going to tell you anything other than to sit down and go through the big book with a competent sponsor, and your whole life will be revolutionized. Your entire way of living and thinking will be transformed over and over and over if you give yourself to this process. But there's a huge price that has to be paid. Destruction of self-centeredness. And when I hear that word destruction, I hear death. And as sponsors, one of our chief responsibilities is to help our sponsees die a little bit every day. Die your way of thinking. die doing what I want to do when I want to do it just because it feels good and it's what I want to do. Right? That's our job. Remember, rebirth requires a death, I think, before it, or something very painful to come into existence, because it's a rebirth. It ain't the first one. 5 weeks later, they let me out of this jail. I had to go to this treatment center about 35 minutes north of here, 40 minutes north of here. And I started going to this meeting, and I met this guy. His name was Dante. Didn't like the guy the first couple of years I met him. He's been one of my greatest influences, one of my greatest teachers. And I hope everyone finds a hero in Alcoholics Anonymous, because this guy's one of my heroes. And he spoon-fed me the recovery program out of this big book. But something happened to me when I was in that jail. I kept having this information delivered to me, but it was not created by my thinking mind. And one of it was I had to go back to his meeting on Friday night, and I had to find him and this guy named Randy. Because I'd been to this man's house on Monday night where he did a big book workshop for 22 years. Every Monday night, taking a group of guys to the steps. And he used to say things at our home group on Friday night. And they weren't all said at the same time, but I remember hearing things like, you might want to think about working the steps before you share in a meeting, so you can have something good to say. And I remember thinking to myself, who does this guy think he is? He doesn't know where I've been and who I am. I have something to offer. But I was directed in that jail to go back to this guy's house on Monday night and to go to this Friday night meeting. Him and the guy he sponsored at the time named Randy. I get to this treatment center on a Tuesday. Nobody in this treatment center wants to go down to Sandy Springs. We're all the way up and coming. And finally, I worked them over. This is when self-will on riot works really in your favor, and this is when self-propulsion works in your favor. And I worked them over, and I said, I got to get to this meeting. And they took us into the meeting. We were late on that Friday night. The meeting had already started. It was a rainy Friday night. And we pull into the church parking lot, and there's one guy out in front of the church on his cell phone. I didn't know how to get a hold of either one of them at this point. So I get out of the van and I run. And the guy standing out on his phone is this guy, Randy, sponsored by Dante. And I walked back into his life when he was looking for someone to take through that big book. And I said, hey man, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I just don't want to die living this way. And he met with me once a week. And we covered a chapter a week. And then I wrote inventory. And I did 5, and I did 6, and I did 7. And at step 8, he handed me off to Dante. Because Randy, I don't think had ever taken someone that far along, or had very little experience. So he came with me on Monday night. And I think I stuck through Dante like flies on shit from that point forward. And every Monday night, this man would take us through the steps, and he spoon-fed me that program of recovery out of that big book. One of the things that he did for me that I don't know if he remembers, we were sitting I had just gotten through 3 amends, and by this time they give me the green light to sponsor. And we were circled up in the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting, and he leans over to him and he says, hey, that guy raised his hand when they were asking who was new, who needed a sponsor. As soon as this prayer is over, you go over there and talk to him. That's the type of 12-step fellowship that I grew up in. He taught me about the meeting before the meeting. He taught me about the meeting. He taught me about the meeting after the meeting. He taught me the importance of going out to dinner and fellowship and Longhorn. 3 straight years every Friday night. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. If you observe or witness excellence in someone, all you got to do is walk up to them and ask them what they do and just do what they do. It is that simple. But we like to complicate things. And so I began to work the steps. I got to those amends. I started sponsoring. So here was my MO. And I don't know if anybody else can relate to this. I show up to a treatment center with my tail between my legs on day 1. I'm willing to do whatever you want me to do. I'm completely open-minded. By day 30, my ideas look a little bit better than yours by this point. All right? And I've started to eat and I'm putting some weight back on. By day 60, the treatment center has asked me to look for a job. And so I start looking for a job and I get a job. Now my ideas are the best. By day 90, I've gotten paid. I've got some money in my pocket, a girl's talking to me. I'm practicing all the one-word principles behind the steps. I'm not working any steps. And I think I'm in recovery. And see, something happens. Life throws a curveball. And I'm the kind of guy that needs an anesthetic to cope with that curveball. And I start down the path again, and I burn it to the ground once again. Remember, I'm a guy that's seldomly mildly intoxicated. So these guys took me through the steps. And I went over to this place called Hope Homes. I'll never forget it. Go over into this apartment. This guy's asked me to sponsor him. You see, I had nothing to connect me to day one all those other times. Nothing. The resurgence of the ego is a fascinating thing. I go sit down with this young man. I think I had about 5 months, somewhere between 4 and 5 months at this point. I'm trying to read the title page and the preface and the forwards of this kid. And I remember looking at him and saying to myself, holy shit. Excuse my language. But holy shit. This is what I was like when I had a week clean, when I was a week sober. This is what I was like. I'm willing to do whatever I have to do to never be like that ever again. And that's what I've done from that day to this day. That's what connected me to day one. That's what completes the circle. Newcomers in here, you're not the most important one in the room. I'm going to shatter a myth right now. You're not. This is a circular deal. If the newcomer is the blood in our program, blood needs a heart to pump through. And that heart is the 12-step workers that are out here carrying this message. 12 leads into one. You can't have one without the other. That's what this whole deal is about. Those 12 steps, the 12 traditions, 12 concepts of service, they culminate into one thing, carrying this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. That's it. That's why we are here. It's not about getting credit cards back and getting money back and getting houses and girlfriends. Treating our bodies, which is what we love to do, right? The keto diet, the paleo diet, yoga. That's what we do. We treat the body. We never treat the spiritual void. Rarely. And that wasn't what sold me hook, line, and sinker, though. It was close. I had this court case going on. My lawyer convinced me I was going to prison. He said, look, we're looking at 3 years in prison. We're going to try to get you into a work camp for 18 months, but you need to mentally prepare that you're going. And I would have conversations with Randy and Dante about it. One of them would usually say, pray about it. Keep making the amends. Keep helping others. Maybe there's someone in jail waiting for you to carry the message to them. I hated that one, but they would pull that one. But they guaranteed me something. They guaranteed me they said they knew exactly what was going to happen if I didn't continue making amends. If I didn't learn how to pray and meditate. If I didn't get an accountability network. If I didn't sponsor people. They knew exactly what was going to happen to me, it wasn't going to end well. And I bought that. They couldn't guarantee me what was going to happen if I did work the steps, and I was cool with that. Because there's that beautiful prayer on page 68. God, please remove my fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. It's a conditional prayer. We will commence to outgrow the fear immediately because our state of being and our state of consciousness requires us to change in that instant when we say that prayer. You have to become trusting. You have to become confident. You have to become secure, and the fear leaves. Maybe it's temporarily, but when it comes back, that's what our 10th step is for. Watch, ask, turn our thoughts, cease fighting, practice a code of love and tolerance. If we step on our fellow's toes, we repair the damage. And we try to practice that position of neutrality. That's the 10th step. As I walk, how I interact with you is based on that step. So I did what the men told me to do. 9 months to the day. I Footnote. I'm very meticulous and I'm very organized, so I documented my entire recovery. Every drug screen and alcohol test that I passed at the treatment center, I said, give me a copy of it. When I got a job, parking cars in Buckhead at a restaurant, I had my employment verification. I'm in the treatment center with 90 days. I've caught fire with this big book. The clinical director comes to me and says, will you do a big book study? I'm a client doing a big book study. Staff members are sitting in on it. How does that happen? The power of God. That's how that happens. A God that I cannot explain, define, comprehend, nor do I really want to. That fascinates me day in and day out. That's full of vengeance and full of wrath and full of love and full of power and full of mercy and full of kindness. God is everything. But He's also nothing, because as soon as I say that's God, it's not really God, because God's not knowable. So I collected all of these things. My lawyer says, okay, we're going to file this motion to suppress the evidence. And we got a 50-50 shot to get it, so we might as well try it. And so we're going to file a motion. By this time, I'm living in my own apartment, so I've also got that lease in that folder. And he goes in to meet with the assistant district attorney. And this was my miracle. And the word miracle, the definition, when we witness something that we cannot explain. The district attorney dropped all the charges that day. They looked at me as a young man that was trying to change his life, and they saw no purpose in trying to pursue their charges against me. Trafficking, intent to distribute. I'm not saying that to be cool. I'm saying that because those are some serious charges that usually don't just disappear. No community service, no probation. But all I could think about that morning in my little studio apartment, up and coming, was one line out of our big book. We hope after reading these pages, no further authentication will be necessary. And that was it. When they say no further authentication, that means if you read our stories, you don't have to go out there and drink again. You will convince you. The problem is, my story tonight's not going to convince you. It's not. Most of you might feel good. You might feel energized after you walk out of here and listen to this talk. Some of you will hate it. That's fine. There are people sitting here that don't like me right this second. I'm cool with that. It's fine. But the only thing that can convince you is alcohol. The great persuader. That's it. We try to pull you in with a message of depth and weight. We try to carry a vision. We try to deliver some hope. And maybe you've been reduced to nothing, just enough to where your liar has gone into remission. That was what sold me hook, line, and sinker. But when I described my surrender in that county jail, we call this, we talk about this pink cloud. Don't you love the spiritual experience squashers that tell you the pink cloud's going to burst? Because that's what they are, really, right? They don't want you to just seek, get more curious, investigate more, make all those amends, practice prayer and meditation, be quick to see where religious people are right, make use of what they offer. We don't get any of that. Calm down, young man. That bubble's going to burst. That pink cloud, you can't stay on it. They told me that almost 11 years ago, and it's still here. It's still here. And then we talk about this thing called the window of grace. So, in that county jail, the voice, everyone sitting in this sanctuary right now has a voice that's lying to you. Its core ideology, let's say, is to talk you out of everything that's in your highest good. That's what it does. Talk. And it's lying. What happens when we get on that pink cloud, and we enter that window of grace, the liar goes into remission. Just like alcoholism, our greatest character defect is not removed. It goes into remission. Like all the other character defects in my book. They just go into remission. We've all seen what happens to an alcoholic that doesn't treat the problem. And when they start to drink, they all come out of remission. Same thing with alcoholism. Same thing with the voice of the liar. So here's the deal. If the voice is not chattering, and you're following all the clear-cut instructions that your sponsors are giving you, you have about the time you have to complete these 12 steps, is between now and when that liar's voice comes back. And that's the cold, harsh truth is none of us know when it's coming back. That's why we have to work these steps so quickly. Big Book references it twice, a couple of weeks or a couple of months. We got to get into this program of action as quickly as possible. Because when we get into this program and we work these 12 steps, we experience the most beautiful, magnificent thing that this program has to offer: sanity. The first miracle is quick. It's separation from alcohol. It has to happen, otherwise there'd be no recovery. Does that make sense? But the sanity is a long process, and there's different layers and degrees of the sanity. It's very basic in Alcoholics Anonymous. Very basic. There are other things in Alcoholics Anonymous that are very marginal. We love the word serenity, right? It's a marginal thing. Your emotions can be all over the place, and you can be disturbed immensely, and you can still be sane and have a position of neutrality against the first drink. Do not attempt the desperate experiment of that first drink. That's a beautiful thing for people like us. So sanity's one. Another one is money and wealth. A lot of people lose everything and recover, and they never get everything back. Some people do. Financial situations change. But we equate recovery with that, don't we? Swiping that credit card. And then there's health. Health is another one that comes and goes. But we think health means recovery. It doesn't always. It's a marginal. It comes and goes. But what's basic and essential and vital is the sanity. When the Big Book says the problem has been removed, it's the illusion that I ever had a choice. That's gone. That is gone. That's the most beautiful part of this program. And that's what we have to offer here to the newcomer, is a personal experience with a God of your understanding. I don't try to sugarcoat it when I speak from the podium. The regenerative power of God. And I'm telling you, I've sponsored enough men for a long period of time now where there's this residual effect. A few of them, a handful of them, but when I see and I remember years ago when I first saw them in the beginning, and the transformation cannot be explained by anything other than the regenerative power of God. Regenerative power. That's what we're dealing with here. How much of it do you want? How much of it do you want? One of my greatest influences said, you go to the thimble with an ocean, you get a thimble full of water. What kind of container do you want to take? Or is God limited? And the 12 steps are spiritual kindergarten. I'm going to tell you that right now. But they're essential for people like us. That's the modality by which I learned that I could have a relationship with a power greater than myself. But there's this line, these two sentences in our Big Book, and I referenced them earlier. Be quick to see where religious people are right and make use of what they offer. Get curious. Go have an investigation. I've spent time in Buddhist monasteries, Catholic monasteries, mosques. It does not matter to me. The power is sensed in all those places. And thank God, I just have this curiosity to investigate. And this is what I try to pass on to the men I sponsored. Some of them are open to it, some of them are not. That's fine. But the 12 steps is our baseline. The Big Book is our baseline. That's what we do here. We show people how to climb onto the donkey and climb the mountain and have your own experience with the vista at the end of the mountain. It's a beautiful thing. It's available to everyone here. Now, if I said something that has somehow disturbed you, take out a piece of paper, put 4 columns on it, and put my name in the first column.